The wind didn't care that she had nowhere to go. It pushed through the narrow street like it owned the place, tugging at the baby's blanket and pulling May Calder's braid loose from its pins. She stopped in front of the old general store. The wood creaked under her boots. Above her, the sign read, "For sale." Faded paint, tilted letters, like even the building had given up. May didn't knock. She didn't even look around. She just stood there, holding a child that hadn't cried in 2 days. Not when they left the ranch, not when her husband never came back, not when May had buried the last of their food beside a burnt fence post. The baby stirred in her arms, but still no tears. And then a boot step behind her. Slow, careful. Not the kind that meant danger, but not the kind that meant help either. May turned. A man stood 10 feet away, tall, weathered, hat brim low. He didn't speak, didn't reach for her, just raised one hand, slow and steady, toward the baby, not her, as if to say, "I remember him." May Calder didn't plan on stopping in that town. She hadn't planned anything, really. Not since the night the gunshots came from the ridge and her husband never made it back from the creek. The baby had fevered that night, and May had sat beside the fire, praying to no one in particular, holding wet cloth to his forehead with one hand and a loaded rifle in the other. By morning, the rifle was cold. The trail was colder. They walked. 3 days, 4 towns. Everywhere she went, someone looked at her like she was a burden they didn't ask for. But this time, the man didn't look at her at all. He looked at the baby. The "For sale" sign creaked on rusted hinges as the wind changed again. May shifted her weight, the porch boards beneath her groaning in protest. The baby was quiet, too quiet. "His name's Jonah," she said without meaning to. The man didn't flinch, didn't nod, just let his hand fall slowly to his side. May stared at him. Hard. She had learned that look somewhere around the second funeral, the one for the dog. By the time her husband was buried, that look had sharpened. But this man didn't challenge it. He just looked steady. Brown coat, dusty boots, hands that looked like they could crush bone or hold a feather. He hadn't said a word, and maybe that's what made her stay. "You got a wife?" she asked. Still nothing. "Dead or just smarter than me?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "That's all." May shook her head. "You don't talk? Fine. Don't need you to." She turned toward the door of the general store. It didn't open. Locked. Of course it was. Behind her, the man stepped once. Just one boot step on dirt. Not toward her, just enough to be closer if something went wrong. Not too close. Not too far. May felt her stomach twist. Not with fear, with hunger. Jonah stirred. He always knew, even asleep. "There a boarding house in this place?" Finally, the man nodded. May bit her lip. "They don't take girls like me, do they?" He tilted his head slightly. "You know, with no money, no husband, just..." She glanced down at Jonah. "Just too much need and not enough worth." Still, he didn't speak. Instead, he stepped back and pointed, one silent finger, to a structure 3 blocks down. Faded blue shutters, hanging sign that read, "Kensler House." Then he walked away. Not toward her, not toward the boarding house. He just walked to the edge of the street, leaned against a post, and waited. The landlady at the Kensler House looked at her like she'd brought the plague. "I got one cot in the attic," the woman said. "No firewood, windows cracked, and no fussing at night. You got a crying baby, that's your problem." May nodded. "How much?" "2 bits, weekly." May reached into her satchel. Fingers brushed lint. Nothing else. She looked back at the porch. He was still there, watching, not intruding, not offering, just there. "I'll earn it," May said softly. "I can sweep, scrub, sew." "No hands needed," the landlady snapped. "Not with a squalor on your hip." May hesitated. Then she turned and walked out, back into the wind. She didn't cry, not when the door slammed, not when Jonah whimpered, not even when she saw the man had vanished. But when she looked again, there he was, across the street, paper bag in hand. He crossed the road slow, like he didn't want to spook her, held out the bag. May stared at it, then at him. He didn't offer words, just stood there, like a shadow that meant safety. She reached out, took the bag. Inside, 2 boiled eggs, a small bottle of milk, and a folded piece of paper with a single word scribbled in tight, almost angry handwriting. Boone. That night, May slept in the shell of the general store. No cot, no mattress, just her shawl, Jonah's warmth, and Boone's silence somewhere outside. She fed the baby slowly, milk first. He drank it like he remembered what hunger was. May didn't eat. She watched the stars instead. Every one of them looked like a road she couldn't take. But the man named Boone had given her one thing no one else had. Not kindness, not food, witness. He saw her, and he stayed. Boone Thorne woke before sunrise like he always did. Old habits didn't die. They just got quieter with time. The general store's porch was still wet from the night chill, and he stood there with a matchstick in his mouth, unlit. He didn't smoke, just liked the weight of it. Like some men wore wedding bands they no longer believed in. He watched the store's door like it might shift open on its own, like the woman and her baby might disappear before the light reached them. But when May Calder emerged with her son wrapped tight in a worn shawl, she didn't look like she was going anywhere. She didn't look at him either. Boone let the match fall from his lips. He followed, not close, just enough that she'd know he was behind her if she ever turned around. She didn't. The town of Red Hollow wasn't a place that welcomed questions. It was the kind of place that stayed the same because the people in charge needed it to be. A few families, some with money, others with muscle, and all of them with too many secrets. Boone knew most of them. He'd once carried letters between ranchers here, then led men through the mountains when they didn't want to be seen. A few years back, he left town after a job went wrong. No one asked why he returned. They just looked the other way, like a stray dog they weren't sure was safe to feed. He didn't owe Red Hollow anything, but he owed Jonah's father. May crossed the street, her boots nearly silent despite the dust. She paused in front of the boarding house again, stared at the sign, then turned away. Boone saw her hand press against her stomach like she was keeping something inside. Not hunger, something older than that. She walked into the back alley behind the butcher's. Boone frowned. A few minutes later, she came back out with red cheeks and shaking hands. No meat, no food, just a silent baby pressed to her chest and a look in her eyes like she'd been told more than once she wasn't welcome. Boone stepped forward, not thinking. May froze. "I didn't ask for help," she said finally. Boone nodded once. Not in agreement, not in challenge, just a statement of presence. She looked at him, really looked, like she was counting the bones in his face for weakness. "What was his name to you?" she asked. Boone blinked. His throat moved, but the sound didn't come. She waited, then softer. "You knew my husband." Boone's voice was quiet, coarse from disuse. "Elias Calder. Rode with him once. Mining run up past Gentry's Ridge." May squinted. "That was 3 years ago." Boone nodded. "You still carrying debt from then?" He didn't answer. May let out a sharp breath. "He said there was someone who made it out. Said if anything happened to him, that man would find us. You?" Boone looked down at Jonah. The baby's eyes were wide, blue-gray like clouded glass. He didn't blink much, just stared. "Why didn't you come sooner?" May asked. Boone didn't have an answer for that. He just reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch, held it out. May didn't take it at first. When she did, she opened it slowly, like it might bite. Inside were $3 and 2 coins, older than statehood. She closed it. "I don't take handouts," she said. "Wasn't a handout." "What was it then?" Boone met her eyes. "Settling." May bit the inside of her cheek. Her hands tightened around Jonah. "Then I suppose I should say thank you." He shook his head. "Not owed." May hesitated, then stepped around him. Boone didn't follow. Not yet. He watched her walk until she vanished into the shade of the mercantile. Then he turned toward the livery stable. He had something else to settle. The man who ran the stable was named Harvick. Boone had seen him once before, 4 years ago, standing over Elias Calder's shoulder, whispering numbers into his ear. Harvick was a man who never got his own hands dirty. He let others die for the weight of his words. When Boone stepped into the stables, Harvick didn't look up. You lost? Boone didn't respond. Harvick finally raised his eyes. Recognition came slow and sour. Well, I'll be damned. You're still walking. Boone stepped closer. You still collecting from dead men? Harvick's eyes narrowed. This about Elias? That fool owed every damn soul from here to San Angelo. He knew what he signed. Boone's hands didn't move, but the air shifted. I didn't sign anything, Boone said. But I remember. Harvick stood. You making threats, Thorne? Boone tilted his head slightly. Just cleaning up. Harvick looked past him, toward the stall door. You and that woman, that widow. I warned her. No squatting, no begging. This town's got rules. Boone's voice dropped. And who made them? Harvick smirked. Men like me. Boone took a step forward. Not anymore. They stared at each other. Then Boone turned and walked away. He didn't need to kill Harvick. Not yet. But he'd left a message. May sat on the floor inside the general store, feeding Jonah with slow, careful fingers. Her back was against the wall, her legs stretched out, the hem of her dress dust-stained and frayed. She looked tired in the way bones get tired, a kind of tired that couldn't sleep away. Boone placed a box on the floor beside her. She glanced at it. Spoiled milk and old beans? He didn't smile. Fresh. From where? He didn't answer. May leaned back. You always this generous with strangers? No. So why me? Boone looked at Jonah. He's not a stranger. May exhaled. He never met you. Boone's voice turned gravelly. I met him. She didn't understand. Not fully. But she didn't push. Instead, she lifted the lid of the box. Inside were cans, wrapped bread, 2 jars of dried fruit. She took one jar, twisted it open, and pulled out a slice of apple. Jonah blinked, reached, took it with tiny hands. He chewed, he smiled. Boone's shoulders dropped slightly. May noticed. You lost a child, she asked. Boone didn't answer, but she knew. She looked at him differently after that. Not as a savior, not as a burden, as a man with something broken inside him too. And maybe that was the first time she trusted him. Just a little. That night, when the wind howled through the broken windows of the store, Boone didn't leave. He sat outside the door, back against the wall, rifle across his lap. He didn't say a word, and May didn't ask him to. But before she closed her eyes, she whispered, Thank you. He didn't respond, but she swore, just as sleep pulled her under. She saw his head tilt once, like a bow, not of submission, but of witness. Again, May woke before the sun found its way through the broken shutters. Jonah had stirred in the night, coughing in his sleep, and she'd laid there wide awake for hours, counting every breath like it might be his last. The general store still smelled of old dust and cracked wood, but it was dry, and right now that was enough. She sat up slowly, her arms stiff from holding him through the cold. Boone wasn't there when she checked the door. For a moment her chest hollowed, and then she saw it, on the edge of the porch. A small tin cup of warm milk. No note, no footsteps. Just the steam still curling in the cold air. She didn't smile, but she didn't cry either. Not anymore. Later, when the town began to wake and the church bell rang from the east end of Red Hollow, May wrapped Jonah in her shawl and stepped outside. She needed something, anything to offer back. She couldn't keep taking. Her pride had already thinned to near nothing. She made her way to the bakery on Main, where Mrs. Dentler kneaded dough every morning with swollen fingers and sharp eyes. May had seen her once, years ago, when Elias brought home stale bread wrapped in wax paper. I'll work, May said simply, standing in the doorway. Mrs. Dentler looked her up and down, pausing on Jonah like he was a stain. You're Elias Calder's girl, May nodded. His widow. The older woman snorted. Ain't that the fashionable thing now? Men run off or get themselves killed, and the women come crawling into kitchens looking for scraps. May didn't flinch. I'll sweep. I'll scrub pans. I'll even serve if you let me. Mrs. Dentler narrowed her eyes. No nursing while you're on shift. No crying neither. I run a clean business. May met her gaze. I don't cry. She started that afternoon. The kitchen was hotter than the street outside. May scrubbed until her nails bent backward. Jonah slept in a basket behind the flour sacks. No one spoke to her except for Dentler, and her words were clipped like dried grass. But it was work, and May held on to it like a rope in floodwater. That evening, she stepped out with 2 coin pieces in her hand and calluses on her fingers. Boone was waiting across the street, seated on a bench like he'd been carved there. He didn't ask how it went, didn't ask where she'd been, just stood when she approached and walked beside her back to the store. "You always this quiet?" May asked, glancing sideways. Boone didn't look at her. "Talk's cheap," she smirked. "So is bread." He didn't respond. She liked that about him. That night she shared one of the loaves she earned. They sat on the porch together, not quite close enough to touch, not far enough to ignore. Jonah slept against her chest and Boone passed her a tin of beans without a word. May finally said, "They used to say Elias talked too much, told big stories, promised things." Boone nodded once. "I loved that about him," she added softly, "even when I knew some of it was nonsense." Boone's fingers tapped once on the wood beside him, almost like a beat, almost like agreement. "He used to say if anything ever happened to him, I should find a man who knew how to listen instead." She looked at him. Boone didn't move. "That you?" she asked. Still, he didn't answer, but his presence was louder than anything words could have given her. The next morning, the town remembered she was there. It started with glances, then whispers. By afternoon, Sheriff Halbrook stopped by the store. He wasn't a cruel man, just a tired one, too used to keeping order by making sure nobody asked for too much. "You staying here, miss?" he asked. May nodded. "For now. Place isn't fit to live in. I've lived in worse. Town folk are uneasy." May raised a brow. "About a woman feeding her child and minding her business?" Halbrook sighed. "It's not you, it's things. You bring a story back with you." Boone stepped onto the porch behind her. Halbrook's spine stiffened. "Didn't know you were back, Thorne." Boone didn't speak. Halbrook cleared his throat. "Just keeping the peace." May stepped forward. "Peace is easy when folks like me aren't in sight, huh?" The sheriff didn't reply, just tipped his hat and left. May turned to Boone. "He always that brave." Boone's mouth twitched. That night she found a blanket folded by the door. She hadn't seen Boone leave it. Inside the folds was a single bootie, child size, hand-knitted, worn but soft. She stared at it for a long time. The next day the bakery job was gone. Mrs. Dentler simply said, "Don't need you no more." No explanation. May left without a word. Boone didn't ask. He just brought her a fresh bar of soap and a tin of sugar the next morning. By the fourth day, May stopped asking why he helped. By the fifth, she realized she was waiting for him, listening for his footsteps, watching for his silhouette in the morning light. And on the sixth, when Jonah got sick again, fever high, skin hot, breath wheezy, she didn't knock on any doors. She just stepped onto the porch and whispered into the dark, "Boone." He came, within minutes. No questions, no judgment. He laid Jonah down on the cleanest part of the floor, stripped his own coat to roll as a pillow, and placed a damp cloth across the child's brow. May knelt beside them, heart pounding. "He's burning." Boone said nothing, just stayed. All night. May didn't sleep. She watched the way Boone kept one hand on Jonah's tiny chest, steady, quiet, there. By dawn, the fever broke, and so did May. She turned to Boone, eyes red. "I don't know how to do this anymore." Boone's hand reached out, not to touch her, but to lift the cloth, replace it with a fresh one he must have soaked in the night. May swallowed. "What happens when you leave?" He looked at her. Software still. "Not planning to." She didn't cry, but her hands trembled as she reached for the baby. "Then I guess I'm staying too." He nodded, and for the first time since she'd stepped off the wagon trail, May Calder smiled. Not because things were good, but because someone had finally stayed. Boone didn't speak when the first rock hit the store window. He just set down the hammer he was using to mend a crooked shelf and walked outside, slow and deliberate. May followed a step behind, heart tight. Jonah was asleep on a folded quilt behind the counter. The morning had been quiet until then, just the three of them inside, fixing up what the town had let rot. Boone had started repairing the shelves, May had begun sweeping out the years of dust, shaking out old curtains, finding forgotten tins of thread and pins. Then the glass shattered. Outside, a boy no older than 13 stood frozen, rocks still clutched in his hand. Behind him, a few townsfolk lingered at the corner, watching but not approaching. Harvick stood there too, arms folded, a smirk hidden beneath his whiskered jaw. Boone didn't raise his voice. He didn't take a step forward. He simply looked at the boy, then at the rock on the ground. The boy dropped it, ran. May's breath shook in her throat. Boone didn't move, not until Harvick called out, "You think fixing up that corpse of a store is going to make her one of us?" Boone turned his head slightly. Harvick spit on the ground. "This town's not for women like her, not for ghosts with bastards and sob stories." May stepped forward, fist clenched. But Boone's arm reached out slightly, not to hold her back, just to remind her she didn't need to. He walked forward alone. May didn't hear what he said when he reached Harvick, didn't see his hands rise or fists fly. But when Boone came back, Harvick didn't follow, and the men at the corner looked away when May passed. That night, they boarded the window with wood Boone planed himself. May helped. She didn't ask what had been said. Boone didn't offer. But when they sat outside afterward, sharing the last of the coffee, she said softly, "You could have heard him." Boone nodded. "But you didn't." His eyes stayed on the horizon. "Didn't need to." May looked down at her hands. They were stained, raw from cleaning, but they didn't shake anymore. "I think I was more afraid of kindness than cruelty," she admitted. Boone's gaze finally turned to her. May didn't look away. Cruelty's predictable, but when someone gives you something without asking, it undoes you. Boone didn't reply, but he shifted slightly closer. Just enough. The next day, a letter arrived, not at the store, at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Halbrook read it twice, then came down the street himself. He found May kneeling in the back room, sewing Jonah a blanket from scraps. "There's been a claim filed on the store," he said. May blinked. "What kind of claim?" "Ownership. Someone's buying it." She rose slowly, dust on her skirt. "It's for sale." "I know, but it ain't you signing papers." May stepped past him, found Boone in the front. He was packing his tools. She stopped. "You did it." Boone didn't look up. "Store's yours now." She took a breath. "Why?" "'Cause you stayed." May's lip trembled. "I don't know how to accept that." "You don't have to." "Then what do I do?" Boone paused, set his tools down, turned to her. "Make it yours." She didn't move for a long time, but that night she took down the old sign. "For sale" came off in 3 nails and a single pull. Boone helped her carry it to the shed out back. They burned it together. The flames were small but steady. Jonah watched from May's arms, eyes reflecting gold. No one said anything. They didn't have to. The next morning, the porch had new steps. Boone must have built them before dawn. May hadn't heard a thing. A basket of bread sat at the door. No note. But May knew it wasn't from Boone. Someone else had left it. A small crack. A whisper of change. Later, a girl from town brought fabric scraps. "For the baby," she said, not meeting May's eyes. May said thank you anyway. She hung the fabric over the windows. Boone brought nails. The store became more than a shelter. It became a home. But the town wasn't done testing them. 3 nights after the fire, someone tried the door handle in the dark. May heard it first. Boone had taught her to sleep with one ear open. She didn't scream, didn't move suddenly. She reached for Jonah, tucked him tight. Boone was already at the door. He didn't open it, just stood there, breathing slow. After a minute, footsteps backed away. No more visits after that. May didn't ask what he would have done if they'd come inside. He didn't say, but the next day he built a latch that could stop a bear, and she baked cornbread. When she handed him a piece, still warm, he held it like it was something holy. May sat beside him. No one said anything for a while. Then she asked, "You ever been married?" Boone shook his head. She nodded. "Me neither. Not really." Boone tilted his head. "I mean, papers, yes, but not this. Not staying, not silence and safety and knowing someone's near even when they don't speak." He didn't respond, but his hand rested on the porch between them. close enough that her pinky could have touched his. She didn't, but she saw it, and it was enough. May stood in front of the shelf she'd been building from scrap wood and bent nails. Eyes narrowed, arms crossed. One of the boards sloped left. Just slightly, but enough to annoy her. Boone didn't say anything. He stood beside her, hands tucked in his coat pockets, watching her stare it down like it had insulted her child. "It leans," she muttered. He tilted his head. "Don't give me that. You see it." Boone gave the faintest shrug. May sighed. "We'll fix it later." She turned to Jonah, who sat on a flour sack chewing on the corner of an old book cover. He'd started to babble now. Nothing clear, nothing useful, just the kind of sound that filled empty space and made her chest ache with something like hope. Boone glanced at the boy, then back at May. "He's stronger," she nodded. "He likes the quiet. I think it makes him feel safe." Boone's eyes softened. He didn't smile. He almost never did. But something in him leaned closer when she said things like that. The townspeople had gone quiet too. No more rocks, no more threats. A few had even started nodding when May passed. One woman brought fresh cloth. Another left half a pie on the steps. No names, no words, but gestures. May hadn't let herself believe in gestures for a long time. Then one afternoon, she saw it. On the edge of the property, near the water trough, two men watching. She didn't recognize them, but Boone did. He stepped out from the back room before she could call for him, walked straight toward the door, pulled his coat tighter, didn't say a word. May grabbed Jonah and followed. By the time she reached the edge of the porch, the men were already walking away. Boone watched until they vanished behind the livery stable. "Who were they?" she asked. Boone was silent. "Boone?" He turned. "Debt collectors." May felt her throat tighten. "Mine?" He shook his head. She stepped closer. "Then whose?" Boone met her gaze. "Your husband's, but they think he left something behind." May clutched Jonah tighter. "He didn't leave anything. Not for me. Not for them." Boone said nothing, but he didn't step away. May turned, walked back into the store, her chest burning. She hadn't spoken of Elias much. Not since he died. Not even when Boone had first brought her food or stood outside like a silent dog guarding the gate. Now it came loose like a splinter. "He promised me a ranch," she said, not knowing if Boone had followed her. He had. She set Jonah down on a blanket. "He said we'd have cattle, a little white house with a fence. Said he had a claim. Gold, he said. Said his partner would vouch for him." Boone's jaw tightened. May didn't notice. Said he left it somewhere safe. Just needed time. Just needed one last run. She laughed, but it cracked. "He never came back." Boone stepped closer. May shook her head. "I waited 3 days before I buried what was left. I wasn't even sure it was him, but his coat was there. Blood. His saddlebag." Boone's voice was low. "You buried hope." May nodded. "And I promised I wouldn't dig it back up." Boone didn't speak, but when she turned away, she felt it. His hand on her shoulder. Just once. Just enough. That night, Boone disappeared for 2 hours. May tried not to notice. Tried not to pace. When he returned, his knuckles were scraped, and he had a cut above his brow. She didn't ask. He didn't offer. But he handed her something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a small leather-bound book. Elias's. May stared. "Where?" Boone looked tired. "His things. Locker behind the rail office." She opened it. Inside were notes, sketches, a crude map, coordinates. May sat down hard. Boone watched her, waiting. "This is real," she whispered. Boone nodded once. "He really thought he could make it." "He wanted to," Boone said. "For you." May laughed again, softer this time. "Then why lie?" Boone sat beside her. "He didn't. Not at first, but gold. Makes men believe in magic." May closed the book. "Did you believe in it?" Boone's voice was quiet. "I believed in you." She looked up. For the first time since they met, his eyes didn't drift. They stayed. May didn't cry, but she did something harder. She reached out, placed her fingers over his bruised knuckle, and held them there. Boone didn't pull away, and in that silence, something changed. Not spoken, not rushed, but steady. like shelves that don't lean anymore. The wind returned on the sixth morning, thick with dust and memory. May stood barefoot on the porch, her skirt brushing against her ankles, arms crossed as she watched the horizon for nothing in particular. Jonah slept inside, curled into the folds of a quilt Boone had mended with his own hands. The store was no longer a store. Not really, not to her. It was home now. Patched windows, uneven floorboards, shelves that still leaned but held weight anyway. Like her. Boone came around the side of the building with a bucket of water and a nail between his teeth. He didn't say anything, just nodded once in passing. That was all it took. May stepped down off the porch and followed him to the fence line. There at the edge of the property was a horse she hadn't seen before. Gray, young, restless, tied loosely but not fighting the rope. She asked. Boone glanced at the animal, then shook his head. Yours, he said simply. May blinked. I don't ride. You'll learn. She looked at him, trying to read the lines in his face. They never said what they meant. Boone least of all. But this meant something. Back inside, she found a wrapped bundle on the counter. It wasn't fancy, just butcher paper and twine. She opened it slowly. Inside, a deed. Her name, signed, stamped, paid. Boone didn't come in behind her. He gave her that moment, let her cry quietly if she wanted to. She didn't. Instead, she walked outside and held up the paper like a flag. You really did it. Boone leaned against the post. Now you own it. No, May said. We do. His eyes didn't shift, but she saw it, the change in him. That flicker of something settling. That night, Boone didn't leave when the lanterns dimmed. He stayed, not on the porch, inside. He didn't ask permission, and May didn't offer. He sat in the rocker beside Jonah's sleeping form and stared into the fire. May watched him from the shadows. You still afraid of ghosts? She asked. Boone tilted his head. May moved closer. Because I've got plenty. I've seen worse, he said. She stood there, the distance between them narrowing like a string being pulled taut. I used to believe in rescue, May whispered. When I was young, thought someone would ride in and fix everything. Boone looked up. I don't believe in that anymore, she continued. I believe in surviving, in staying, in building something from the bones. Boone nodded. Then stay, she said. She didn't mean for the night. She meant for good. He didn't answer. He just stayed. Weeks passed. The store slowly transformed. Shelves were restocked, not for customers but for family. Dried herbs, preserved peaches, soap carved by hand. Jonah learned to walk, first stumbling across the uneven planks, then chasing after the chickens May insisted they raise. Boone built a table from salvaged wood. May painted it white. They ate together each night, Boone always last to speak, but never first to leave. One afternoon, May stood out front and saw the same people who once turned away now tip their hats. Boone nodded at them, but said nothing. May said something. She said hello. She said thank you. And people listened. Then one morning, Harvick returned. Not with goons. Alone. He stood in the middle of Main Street waiting. May saw him first. She opened the door, caught Boone mid-step, and said only his name. He didn't hesitate. Outside, the street was quiet. Harvick's face had aged, but the cruelty hadn't left it. Still hiding behind that woman? He spat. Boone stepped forward. May moved with him, but Boone paused, looked back. Not this time, he said. She stopped. He walked alone. They didn't fight. They talked, if you could call it that. It ended with Boone's hand on Harvick's shoulder. No violence, just presence. Harvick left, for good. The next day, a boy from the livery brought flowers. Said his ma told him to. May put them in a jar beside the window. That night, she and Boone sat in silence. The fire popped. Jonah slept. May leaned her head on Boone's shoulder. You ever want to leave? She asked. Boone didn't move. You could, she said. You don't owe me. Boone turned slightly, just enough to rest his chin lightly against her hair. I'm not here to pay something back. Then why? Because you stayed. May didn't speak after that. She didn't need to. Years later, people forgot the woman who arrived barefoot and broken. They remembered the general store that never closed, the man who didn't talk, but always showed up when someone needed help, the woman who fixed things, not just shelves, but people. They remembered the boy with bright eyes and a stubborn streak, who learned to ride before he could read. And they remembered that no one ever took down the new sign above the door: Calder and Thorn, Mercantile and Home. It wasn't fancy, but it meant something, because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that never leave you. They stay, just like he did, just like she did, together, at last. She never asked him to stay, and he never promised he would, but somehow, through quiet days and broken things, they built something that held, a home, not just with walls, but with trust and with staying. Did you ever feel like May, standing with nothing left but a child in your arms and a name the world didn't want? Or maybe you've known someone like Boone, someone who didn't talk much, but showed up anyway and stayed. Tell us in the comments, what part of their story stayed with you the most? Was it the silence, the strength, the way they healed without ever saying the words? We'd love to know where you watch from, and if you believe that some homes are not built with wood or stone, but with two people who choose not to leave. Snow had settled on her shoulders like dust on the forgotten. Miriam crouched beside the barn wall, arms wrapped tight around her daughter. Lena trembled beneath the threadbare shawl, but didn't complain. Hunger had taught her silence. Miriam's fingers, cracked and raw, reached into the satchel and pulled out the last of it, a shriveled apple, half rotted, soft to the touch. She tore it in two without ceremony, gave the bigger half to her daughter. Lena didn't smile, just ate it slow, like it might vanish if she blinked. Miriam ate her half without tasting it. Neither spoke, neither cried. From the hayloft above, a man watched, still as the wood around him, arms folded, boots buried in straw. His name was Reed. He'd once been a soldier, a man of lines and orders. But this kind of war he didn't know how to fight. A mother, a child, a rotting apple shared like gold. He could have walked away. He almost did. But instead, he stepped back into the barn's dark spine and started walking toward the house. Reed hadn't seen another soul in almost 11 months. That was how he liked it. The war had taught him to keep his back to the wall and his world small. People made noise. They needed things. They left behind trouble. But the land, it asked for nothing but sweat and time. The wind didn't lie, and the snow at least was honest about its cold. So when the first prints showed up in the snow outside his barn, small ones, staggered, like they weren't made with certainty, he noticed. He didn't act, just watched. From a crack in the hayloft wall, where the timber was warped from years of sun and storm, he looked down and saw them, a woman and a child. They were nothing but bundled shadows at first, hunched near the far corner beneath the eaves, where the wind didn't bite so hard. He thought maybe they were travelers passing through. Maybe they'd leave, but they didn't. That first night, they just lay there on the straw, the woman curled tight around the girl like she was trying to shield her with her body alone. He didn't approach, didn't speak, just listened to the silence that stretched too long and noticed, with an ache he hadn't felt in years, that no one cried. By the second night, Reed knew they weren't moving on. They hadn't touched anything inside, hadn't raided the feed sacks, hadn't stolen tools. They didn't even light a fire, just curled tighter and tighter, letting the cold press in like it had permission. He started leaving scraps, quiet offerings, half a loaf, a tin cup of broth still warm, a blanket worn but thick. Nothing was taken. He cursed under his breath and tried again. By the fourth morning, he saw the child nibbling something in her lap. He watched closer, squinting through the narrow slats. An apple, software bruised, rot creeping along one edge. Still, the woman broke it in two, gave the larger piece to the child, and ate the rest without complaint. No words were spoken, no gestures exchanged. It was the way her shoulders curved around the girl, the way her fingers trembled, but her hand never shook, that undid him. That night, Reed sat at his table, the rifle across his knees. He didn't clean it, didn't touch the food he'd made, He stared into the fire like it might offer answers it had no business holding. Could leave 'em be, he muttered aloud. Ain't my trouble. The fire said nothing, and neither did the part of him that had buried too many good men and too many worse days in the dirt behind his cabin. By the fifth morning, he cracked, wrapped his thickest coat, lined with fur stitched by hand years ago, and walked it down to the barn. He didn't knock, didn't clear his throat, just set it near the door and walked away. They didn't see him, but the girl lifted her head when he passed. Her eyes caught his, blue, wide, tired in a way children shouldn't be. Back in the cabin, he waited. By dusk, the coat was still there, folded, untouched. That night, the temperature dropped hard. The snow came in sideways, mean and uninvited. The wind howled against the shutters like it was looking for cracks in his conscience. He didn't sleep, just sat in the rocker, staring at the empty chair across from him, remembering things he'd promised himself he'd forget. When dawn came, he stomped into his boots and threw open the door. Enough was enough. He crossed the yard with long strides, shoulders square, opened the barn door without knocking. She was on her feet before the hinges squealed, slim, shoulders squared, chin high. She stepped between him and the girl without thinking. He raised both hands, slow and empty. I'm not here to hurt you. Her mouth was chapped, eyes red, but her voice was steady. Then what do you want? He paused, searched for something simple. Don't want to find a child frozen stiff behind my barn. She didn't move, didn't soften. The girl peered around her hip, clutching what was left of the apple core. I left you a coat, he said. She nodded once. I saw. He glanced at it, still folded, still clean. You planning to use it? She hesitated. Didn't know if I should. Why not? She shifted her weight. Didn't want to owe you. He sighed, rubbed a gloved hand across his jaw. You don't. Then turned and walked back toward the house. He left the door open, let it speak for him. It took them 3 hours. But when the wind picked up again and the snow started falling fresh, he heard the soft crunch of feet in the yard. The woman didn't knock, just stepped inside, daughter held close. She looked around, silent. He motioned to the fire. Warm yourselves. She hesitated, then nodded. He didn't ask their names, didn't offer his, just poured them tea, set out bread, and sat in the rocker like this was all perfectly ordinary. She fed the girl first, then herself. He noticed she tore her bread and gave her daughter the larger half again, and it stung something in him he didn't know was still alive. Later, when the child fell asleep on the rug with a full belly and flushed cheeks, the woman finally spoke. My name's Miriam. He nodded. Read. She looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to the fire. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. But when Miriam tucked Lena beneath the wool blanket on the floor and sat in silence beside her, Reed stoked the fire once more, tossed in another log and sat back, and thought, maybe quiet wasn't the same as empty. The first night inside his home passed without words. Reed didn't sleep much. He sat in his worn leather chair by the stove, boots still on, eyes half closed but ears sharp. The old cabin creaked with the familiar groan of timber meeting wind. But now there were new sounds, the soft rhythm of a child's breath, the shifting weight of a woman sleeping light, never fully resting. He didn't blame her. Trust took longer than a hot fire and shelter from the cold. In the morning, he didn't offer breakfast, he just made it. Oats with dried cranberries, thick coffee boiled black in the kettle. He didn't speak when he set the bowls down at the table, didn't wait for thanks. He wasn't used to having anyone to eat with anyway. Miriam sat across from him, stiff at first. She watched his hands more than his face. Her daughter, Lena, barely hesitated. She scooped the oats with small, greedy fingers, forgetting pride in favor of hunger. Reed didn't comment. He just ate quietly and kept his eyes down. Outside, the storm had passed, but the world was still white and silent. The windows framed nothing but a cold that waited to swallow anyone foolish enough to test it. Miriam finished her food slowly. When she caught Reed watching, she set her spoon down and lifted her chin slightly. We won't stay long. Reed met her eyes. Didn't say you had to leave. She blinked, caught off guard by the plainness of it. I just mean, we don't want to cause trouble. You haven't. You don't know that yet. Reed shrugged. I know enough. The conversation ended there, but something shifted. Later, he caught her folding the blanket they'd used, her hands careful and practiced. She washed the dishes, too, before he could. Not out of obligation. It was something else. Survival made people contribute where they could. Reed understood that more than most. By midday, he went out to chop wood. When he came back, the cabin smelled of something warm. She'd found the root vegetables in the crate by the stove and made a thin stew. Still no thanks. Still no names for what they were doing. But they ate it together, and when Lena laughed at something, a single, high note like glass catching sun, Reed froze for a moment before quietly returning to his spoon. The second night, he set out an extra blanket before going to his chair. Miriam took it without a word. Lena slept closer to the fire, cheeks flushed from warmth rather than fever. Around midnight, the wind howled again. Miriam stirred. Does it always sound like that? Reed didn't look up. Out here? Yeah. It kept me up the first few weeks. Kept thinking something was coming. Something always is, he said, but it rarely knocks. In the morning, Reed found the kindling pile neatly restacked. He hadn't done it. He looked over at Miriam, who was brushing out Lena's hair with fingers instead of a comb. He didn't say anything, but something softened in his jaw. That day passed slow. He repaired a hinge on the shed door while Miriam boiled water for clothes. Lena sat near the porch, humming to herself, arranging pebbles into shapes. In the afternoon, Reed returned from the edge of his land with 2 rabbits slung over his shoulder. Miriam cleaned them without hesitation. You've done this before, he noted. She nodded. When I had to. He didn't ask what happened to the man who should have been hunting. She didn't offer. That night they ate meat, and Reed opened his only jar of honey. Lena's eyes went wide. Miriam closed hers briefly, just long enough for him to see a kind of grief masked as gratitude. You're using your winter stores on us, she said after the girl had gone to sleep. You're eating like you plan to leave in the morning? Miriam glanced at the fire. I should, but you won't. She didn't answer. He didn't press. But the fire between them crackled a little louder. On the 4th morning, Reed noticed the way Miriam rubbed her wrist while kneading dough. Red marks. He didn't ask, but he left a tin of salve on the table before heading out. She didn't say a word about it, but that evening, he saw her sleeves rolled higher. On the 5th day, Reed fixed the back gate. It didn't need it badly, but he wanted to show that things could hold, that even broken hinges could bear weight again. When he returned, Miriam was sitting outside, eyes on the horizon. She didn't turn when he approached. Your land goes far, she said. It does. How long have you been here? Since the war ended. Which one? He let out the ghost of a laugh. The last one that took something from me I couldn't get back. Miriam nodded. We all got one of those. Later that night, as Reed stood by the window watching snow fall again, Miriam spoke from the firelight. I had a home once. He stayed still. It wasn't much, but it had walls, and he loved her. Not me. Her. Reed didn't turn. She was his blood. I was just the one who kept her alive when he didn't come back. He turned then, slowly. Miriam looked up, eyes glinting. You think you're the only one who carries ghosts? Reed shook his head. No. Good. They didn't talk more that night, but something passed between them. Not words, not confessions. Just a quiet agreement that they were still here, and still choosing to be. On the 6th day, Reed began building a small table. Not because he needed one, he already had a table, but because the old one was narrow, built for solitude. This one he made longer. Miriam watched from the window. When Lena asked what he was making, he only said, something that fits more than one. That night, they sat around the new table. No prayers, no stories. Just the soft clink of spoons and the warm light of a fire that didn't need to be watched anymore. It would burn through the night because someone was tending it. The sound of a hammer echoed in the cold morning air. Steady, deliberate. Reed wasn't one for conversation, but his hands had their own language. Today they were saying what his mouth wouldn't. You can stay. He'd been building since sunup. No blueprints, just instinct. The old table was narrow, barely big enough for a man in his silence. This one would stretch wider, not by much, but just enough to let someone else pull up a chair. Maybe two. From the window, Miriam watched. She didn't come outside, didn't offer help. But every few minutes, her eyes would rise from her needlework or the pot she was stirring just long enough to catch a glimpse. And when their eyes met, accidentally, always accidentally, neither looked away too fast. Inside, Lena hummed softly while she arranged 3 pebbles in a triangle on the cabin floor. She wasn't sure what she was building, only that it felt important to make something out of nothing. By the time Reed carried the table inside, dusk had crept in. The cabin smelled like stew, onions, salt, something wild he couldn't name. He set the new table where the old one had stood, wiped the sawdust from his hands, and didn't say a word. But when Miriam glanced up from her mending, her eyes softened. She didn't smile, not quite, but her shoulders settled, just a fraction. They ate together at the new table that night. 3 bowls, 3 spoons, no toasts, no small talk. But Reed noticed Lena didn't watch him from under her lashes anymore. She looked him straight in the eye when she asked for more bread. He handed her the loaf without blinking. After dinner, Reed stepped out onto the porch. He didn't light his pipe, just held it between his fingers, letting the cold wind bite his knuckles. His breath came out in soft clouds. The stars above looked sharp enough to cut. The door creaked behind him. Miriam stood there, arms crossed, not shivering, not speaking. He didn't move. "You built that table," she said finally. He nodded. "Wasn't much." "Didn't need to be. Still says a lot." Reed looked out across the snow. "Old one was too small." "For one?" He didn't answer, just tapped the edge of the pipe against his boot. "You built something that fits us," she said. He glanced at her. "Didn't know I was." "But you did." Inside, Lena called for a story. Miriam moved to go, but paused at the door. "Do you know any?" Reed hesitated. "Been a long time." "Long time since what?" "Since I had someone worth telling one to." She didn't press, just held the door open a little longer. Reed followed. He sat on the floor that night, back against the wall, voice rough from disuse. The story he told wasn't long or pretty. It was about a horse that couldn't be broken, and a boy who stopped trying. Instead of riding him, the boy just walked beside him, every day, until one day the horse followed without a rope. Lena asked, "Did the horse stay forever?" Reed looked into the fire. "As long as he was treated like he could leave." Later, long after Lena slept, Miriam sat on the rug, legs tucked under her. "That story, it was about you, wasn't it?" Reed said nothing. She reached forward, stirred the coals. "You're the horse. You think people only want to tame you." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "And you think people only stay if they're not asked to." She didn't reply, but her silence wasn't retreat. It was agreement. That night, the table stood silent in the dark, holding no plates, no food. Just the memory of a meal where no one flinched, and the echo of a story that asked nothing, but was heard anyway. The sun came up the way it always did, slow, reluctant, pale. But inside the cabin, something had changed. Miriam had slept without her boots on. It wasn't much, but Reed noticed. He always noticed the things people didn't say. She didn't mention it when she stepped outside, wrapped in her coat, arms folded tight like she was still bracing for the cold that hadn't come yet. The snow had begun to melt. Not much, just enough to leave the porch slick in places and soft in others. She stood there a long time, then said, mostly to herself, "We'll head out tomorrow." Reed was standing a few feet away, splitting wood. His axe paused in midair, but he didn't look at her. "Plenty of road still covered," he said. "I know." He split another log, let it fall in two. "You don't owe me anything," she added. He nodded, still not meeting her eyes. "Didn't say you did." But there was something in the silence that followed. Not discomfort, not tension. Just the quiet weight of something neither of them wanted to name. Inside, Lena was still asleep on the small cot Reed had dragged in from the shed 2 nights ago. Miriam returned, knelt by the fire, stirred the pot absently. Then she saw the broom. It was leaning in the corner, worn smooth at the handle, bristles splayed from years of use and age. Reed hadn't touched it in a long time, maybe since the spring before last. She picked it up and walked out the door without a word and started sweeping the porch. Reed didn't say anything. He watched from the woodpile, axe paused mid-swing. The sight of her, shoulders hunched, hair loose under her scarf, broom scratching at melting snow and old dust, touched something deep in him, something old, something he hadn't let breathe in years. He kept swinging, not because the wood needed splitting, but because it was the only way to keep from walking up there and saying something stupid like, "You could stay." Later that morning, Reed found his old oil can by the porch rail. He hadn't used it in a while, but there it was. Clean, polished, set next to the door like someone had gone looking for it. When he lifted the hinge on the porch gate, it didn't squeal. She'd oiled it. That afternoon, Miriam sat at the new table, helping Lena write her letters on scraps of brown paper. Her daughter pressed the charcoal too hard, broke the edge off 3 times. Each time, Miriam corrected her gently, patiently. Reed sat in the corner, sharpening his knife, but his eyes kept drifting to the small curls of smoke rising from the chimney. Something about them felt steady. Later, Miriam noticed the coat he always wore hanging by the door instead of on him. "You ever get cold?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not when I'm busy." "What happens when you stop being busy?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Don't let myself." That evening, a single rabbit trap came up full. Reed gutted and cleaned it with practiced ease, and Miriam helped string it for stew. Lena fed scraps to a stray dog that had been hanging around the cabin for 2 days now. They didn't name it, it just stayed. When the table was set, Miriam served him first. It was a tiny act, but Reed felt it like a hand across his chest. He didn't know if she noticed the way his fingers paused, the breath he forgot to take before lifting the spoon. But she saw something, and for once, she didn't look away. That night, they sat on the porch after Lena was asleep. The moon hung low. Quiet spread out between them like a blanket neither one wanted to disturb. "I meant to leave," she said. Reed said nothing. "I did." Still nothing. "But I looked at that road this morning, and it felt too empty, like I'd be walking into something with no shape." He nodded. "I've been walking into nothing for a long time now," she added. "Thought maybe I'd try something different." She looked at him. He didn't speak, but his hand, resting on the railing, curled just slightly. She didn't reach for it, but she didn't move away either. The next morning, Miriam swept again. Then she washed Reed's coat. Then she patched a hole in one of Lena's socks. Then she baked something. Not good, not sweet, but it filled the cabin with warmth. She didn't say a thing about leaving, neither did he. But that night, he set an extra log on the fire before going to bed. Not because it was cold, just in case someone woke up needing the light. On the 4th morning, Miriam came in from the barn holding 2 eggs. Reed blinked. "I thought the hens stopped laying." She shrugged. "Sometimes they just need a little company." He raised an eyebrow. "You talk to them?" "Better listeners than most men," he smirked. "I'll keep that in mind." She handed him one of the eggs. "Make breakfast. I'm tired of doing everything." He took it without protest. Lena made a fort under the table that day. She asked Reed for permission first. He grunted something that meant yes, and she disappeared under the blankets with a piece of bread and a stick she claimed was a rifle. Miriam laughed, soft and sudden. Reed looked at her. "You ever laughed before?" she teased. "Not on purpose." She smiled. "You're better when you're not trying so hard to disappear." He looked away. "You make it harder." "That's not an apology." "Wasn't trying for one." "Well, good." They sat in the quiet a while, listening to Lena's imaginary war from under the table. When she finally emerged, hair wild and eyes bright, Miriam caught Reed watching her. "She's doing better," she said. "She's got a reason now." Miriam tilted her head. "You think so?" "She's not the only one." That night, after Lena fell asleep on the rug in front of the fire, Reed stood over her and bent slowly, adjusting the blanket. Miriam watched him. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did. Either way, he didn't rush. When he turned, she was standing behind him. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. Outside, the wind picked up. But inside, it was quiet. And the porch, once swept clean, waited like a welcome mat. The days passed like soft footsteps on old floorboards. quiet, unannounced, but undeniably there. Miriam never said she was staying, but she was. Her coat hung next to his now, her boots lined up near the door. Lena's laughter bounced off the cabin walls like it had always lived there. Reed didn't ask for anything. He just made space. And that space kept being filled, not with words, but with presence. He found her sitting on the porch one morning, sewing something he didn't recognize. "What's that?" She held it up. A rough cloth pouch, stitched carefully. "I found your bullets loose in that drawer. Figured they'd do better in here." He took the pouch, ran his thumb over the stitching. "Didn't ask you to do that." "I know." He didn't hand it back. "It's good work." She shrugged. "I like keeping my hands busy." He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't mind when you do." That afternoon, a storm rolled in sudden and mean, the kind that rattled windows and swept smoke back down chimneys. Reed stood by the door, watching the trees bend, when Miriam came up beside him. "You still think we don't owe you anything?" she asked. He gave a slow blink. "I still think you don't." "Then let me rephrase it." She stepped closer. "I want to be here, not just out of need, out of choice." He didn't answer right away. The wind howled outside. A loose shutter clapped against the frame. Finally, he said, "I never told you to stay." "I know. I never asked for this. I know that too. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't want it." She smiled then, tired but real. "That's all I needed to hear." That night, Lena slept deep and dreamless, her arms wrapped around the stray dog who now had a name. Button, courtesy of Miriam. Reed sat at the table, carving a new handle for his old knife. Miriam placed a cup of tea beside him. "You remember what silence felt like before us?" she asked. He paused his knife. "Heavier. Mine was louder." He looked up. "You were waiting for something to fill it." She nodded. "And you were afraid of what might." He stood then, walked to the stove, stirred the coals. Behind him, her voice came softer. "Why'd you never leave this place?" Reed didn't turn. "Because it never asked anything of me. And now?" He looked over his shoulder. "Now it's not the place that's asking." The next day, they fixed the fence line together. Miriam held the post steady while Reed hammered. Lena followed them with a bucket of nails and a mouthful of questions. "Were you a cowboy?" she asked Reed. "No." "Were you a soldier?" He nodded once. "Did you shoot bad guys?" He paused. "I shot people who might have thought I was the bad guy." Lena didn't fully understand, but she reached for his hand anyway. "I don't think you're bad." Reed looked at Miriam. She didn't say it, but her eyes agreed. That evening, Reed found a photograph tucked between pages of an old Bible on the shelf. A man, a woman, and a child. Faded, almost ghost-like. He brought it to Miriam. "That your husband?" She looked at it for a long time. That's my brother. The only person who ever came back for me." "What happened to him?" "Died in a river crossing. Said he'd make it if I stayed behind." "He lied." Reed set the photo down gently. "You ever wish you jumped in after him?" "Every day." He nodded. "I didn't jump either. For anyone." Miriam looked up at him. "Maybe we both finally did," she said. Later that night, Miriam stood outside watching the stars while Reed closed the barn. When he came up behind her, she didn't turn. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "What?" "Being alone." He thought about it. "Sometimes, but not in the same way." She glanced at him. "What way then?" He stepped beside her. "Now it's a memory, not a goal." They sat together on the porch bench, not touching, but touching everything that mattered. In the morning, he caught her humming while she stirred the oats. "Didn't know you sang," he said. "I don't. That wasn't singing." "Could have fooled me." "Maybe you just forgot what singing sounds like." He watched her, then said quietly, "Maybe I'm remembering." That afternoon, they rode out together to the ridge. Just for air. No purpose. Just being. Lena rode with Reed, her small arms around his waist. Miriam followed behind, her scarf trailing in the wind. At the top of the ridge, the world opened. They sat there until the sun dipped low. Lena leaned into Reed's chest and whispered, "We're not leaving, are we?" He shook his head. Not anymore. Back at the cabin, as the stars crept in, Miriam pulled out an old piece of fabric she'd been saving. I was going to make this into a pack, she said. What for? For the road. She folded it slowly. Don't need it now. Reed watched her fold it once, twice, then tuck it deep into the drawer. That night, as the fire burned low and sleep pulled at the corners of the room, Miriam sat beside Reed on the floor. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just let her stay. She whispered, I never said it. You didn't need to. She closed her eyes, but he stayed awake a little longer, just long enough to feel her breath slow and steady against him. He didn't say it either, not out loud, but it was there, in every breath he didn't take without her. The sun rose with that pale, brittle kind of light, like it wasn't sure if it wanted to commit to the new day. The fields lay still, just kissed with the silver of dawn, and a thin ribbon of smoke coiled from the cabin's chimney, like a promise that someone inside had decided to keep living. Inside, Miriam stirred the pot with one hand, the other resting on her hip. Reed sat at the table, elbows planted, shoulders squared, jaw set in that way that said he wasn't angry, just waiting to feel something besides waiting. Lena played in the corner with the dog, now called Button, now spoiled. They had become a shape, the three of them, not a family by name, not by blood, but by the way none of them moved too far from each other anymore. Town will be waking up soon, Miriam said, not turning. Reed grunted. Let it. You gonna ride in today? Maybe. You don't have to. He didn't answer. She didn't expect him to. Some men speak with silence, and Reed had always been one of them. But lately, the quiet between them didn't hurt. It hummed. Later that morning, Miriam found him fixing the latch on the barn door. Not because it was broken, but because it was crooked, and Reed hated crooked things. You're restless, she said, arms folded. He didn't deny it. You waiting for something? He looked up. Maybe someone. She squinted against the sun. Someone like who? He shrugged, returned to the hinge. Someone who might have followed. Someone who thinks I'm still who I used to be. Miriam stepped closer. You're not. I know. But you think they don't? He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. By midday, Reed saddled the horse. No rifle, just the clothes on his back and a coat too warm for the season. Miriam watched from the porch. You going far? Just to the edge, he said. She nodded once. Be back before supper? He met her eyes. You want me to be? I wouldn't have asked if I didn't. He tipped his hat. Not a promise, not quite, but something near it. Then he rode out slow, not like a man fleeing, like a man confirming the distance he'd come. He returned at dusk. No blood on his hands, no dust on his boots, just a quiet in his bones and a look in his eyes that told her nothing came for him, or maybe nothing dared. They sat on the porch after dinner, watching Lena make shapes in the dirt with a stick. The dog followed behind her like it thought it was helping. Miriam leaned into the back rail, sipped her coffee. So? Reed looked out. So what? You went to the edge. I did. And? He didn't smile, but something softened. No one's coming. She exhaled through her nose. You always think someone will? He nodded. I earned that, but not anymore. He stared at the horizon, quiet. She pressed. Tell me they forgave you, he said. They forgave me. Then looked down at his hands, and she saw it. She saw the truth there, because it hadn't reached his eyes. Lena went to bed early that night. Too much sun, too many made-up stories. Miriam lingered on the porch with Reed. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then, do you believe in redemption? She asked. He didn't flinch. For some. For you. He paused. Some days. And today. He swallowed. Ask me tomorrow. In the quiet that followed, she reached for his hand. He let her. They stayed that way until the moon made its full arc. The next morning, Miriam woke to find him gone. The fire was still warm, and water had been boiled. His cup sat on the table, half drunk. She stepped outside and found him. Not far, just by the fence line, repairing something that didn't really need fixing. You always do that? She called. He turned. Do what? Fix things that still hold. He smirked. Not all of them. She stepped down from the porch, crossed the field with her hair loose and eyes sharp. Then why are you still here? Reed watched her come, watched her stop in front of him, watched her press a hand flat against his chest. I know you, she said. Do you? Yes. He nodded once. Then I should probably tell you something. You don't need to. I want to. She waited. He stepped back, just enough to breathe. I told you they forgave me. You did. That was a lie. I know. His voice broke a little. They didn't write. They didn't call. They didn't care. I just wanted someone to think I could be worth keeping. She looked up at him. Then you should have told me that. He looked like he wanted to say something more, something about not being able to ask for what he needed. But instead she reached up, pulled him down and kissed him, soft, slow, without the need for anything else. When she pulled back, she said, You don't have to lie to stay. That evening, Reed made dinner. Badly, burnt edges, underboiled beans. He apologized 3 times. Miriam laughed every time. I didn't ask you to be perfect, she said. I just wanted you to show up. He looked at her across the table. Then I'm here. She touched his hand. Then so am I. They went to bed that night in the same room for the first time. There was no ceremony, no undressing, just a warmth that came from shared breath and steady quiet. In the morning, Lena ran in shouting about a rabbit in the garden. Reed grumbled, pulled on his boots. Miriam watched from the bed, smiling. This was life. Not a grand thing, just a good one. Days passed. No letters came. No riders crested the hill with news or revenge or consequence. And one night, while sitting under the stars, Miriam asked him again, Did they forgive you? And he said without hesitation this time, No. But then he added, Doesn't matter anymore. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sky forget its own name. Some stories end with fire, others with blood, but this one ends with quiet, with the sound of a broom across a porch, with 3 seats at a table, and a man who finally stopped waiting for forgiveness to feel whole. But tell us this, would you want to know who Weston was before he chose peace? Should we ride back into the shadows he left behind? Comment below, and if you're still here, you're already part of the story.